The doors were locked, the gates were closed, the lights had been extinguished, the fires had been vanquished, and the people went to sleep. And at some point, dawn came again. The first streaks of dawn announced the heralding of a new day, and people began to rise. And as they rose, they came forward. They came forward for a kind of roll call, their names being mentioned. And one by one, as the names were mentioned and the person responded present, there became one name that was not responsive. And so the name was said out loud again, and there was still no response. This time, the prison guard, clearly irritated, said, "Andy, you better be dead up there in your cell, or I'm going to come up there and thump your skull." No response. So as the guard finally went to the cell in a fit of pique, he looked inside and said, "Oh, my holy God." Those of you that have seen The Shawshank Redemption know exactly the scene I'm describing. It's a pivotal scene in the film, a story of men who are in prison and living a miserable prison life, but forming a relationship. But suddenly now the story's going to take an unpredictable turn, an unpredictable arc, and no one really knows what is happening. The prison guard looks into the cell. We don't know what it is he sees when he says, "Oh, my holy God." In fact, we only learn later, a few minutes later, when the warden is bending down to tie his shoes and the prison siren goes off, that actually Andy Dufresne is missing from his prison cell, and no one knows where he is. You know, the story of The Shawshank Redemption is powerful because I think it is a mirror of the Easter story. Note the similarity. The gates were closed. The doors were locked. The Sabbath rest had begun. Darkness had descended upon the land. In this case, an entire Sabbath of rest, a 24-hour period took place. And then at the first streaks of dawn on a Sunday morning, 3 women, we're told, emerged from the darkness and moved to the tomb where Jesus had been laid. As they make their way to the tomb, they talk amongst themselves how they're going to be able to remove the large stone that's in front of it. And they know that there are going to be guards that are stationed there. Why are they going in the first place? See, they're going to mourn Jesus, and more importantly, they're going to anoint him. He was buried so quickly on Good Friday, there was no time for a proper anointing, and these women who loved him so much wished to anoint his body. And so they move into the darkness, into the tomb, but when they arrive there, the stone has been rolled away. The Roman guards are nowhere to be found. The women are forced to look into the tomb. And when they look into the tomb, they suddenly see that the tomb is empty. No one is there. They must have said, "Oh, my holy God." In a later account, Jesus will appear to Mary Magdalene, and in another account, an angel appears and tells them, "The man you're looking for is not here. He has risen from the dead. Go tell the others and go to Galilee. There you will see him." And we're told the women run away. When we look carefully to the story we read last evening, the Mark version of Easter for the Easter Vigil, and the more romantic version that you heard this morning, the one thing is really clear is that when the Easter scene is first apprehended by the 3 women, there is confusion, there is bewilderment, there is terror, there is fear, there is mystery. What seems to be missing is all that joy that we associate with Easter. There's a reason for that. When the women came to the tomb, they came to mourn. Therefore, they were in sadness. They came to encounter the presence of the Lord in the same way you and I go to the cemetery to visit those that we love and mourn their passing, even after many years have taken place. It's a place of both sadness and also connection. They were seeking that kind of connection by seeing the Lord laying there. And then, of course, their auspicious mission to anoint his body, to complete the work that was so ceremonial, to bless this gift that God had given them and to continue their mourning. But something's missing from that story, and here's the other part that I believe is missing. Not only did the women go mourning and desiring to do an anointing, the women are also filled with shame. They were followers of Jesus, and followers of Jesus were associated with his crime. He had been executed for being a revolutionary, for being an insurrectionist, for being a blasphemer among the Jewish peoples. And therefore, anyone that followed him, anyone that was associated with him, was scourged in the same way with everything that happened to him that we heard on Good Friday. These women carried that new shame that had been laid upon them with them. That would be a new burden that was going to haunt their life. And it was going to be a challenging burden to deal with the shame of being known as a follower of that man. Oh, my holy God. For me, the journey was very different. I shared with my flock back in August a portion of my story. I've shared with them that for the 22 odd years that I've been a priest, and for the 27 years after the death of Michael, how I had never gone to visit his grave. And it had mourned him greatly, but had never really shared that with others. In August, I revealed the journey that brought me last summer finally back to his grave, what had kept me from going. First of all, it was the grief of losing someone that was so close to me, the whole range of emotions that come with that, the fear that the visit would only visit more grief and more difficulty and more darkness, and about the last thing I needed in my life was more grief. But I also shared with my community that I realized this responsibility. I preached funerals for the last 22 years and then told people, go to the cemetery, encounter your loved one, believe in the resurrection, and then I wasn't doing the very same thing myself. I thought that was what was keeping me away. But the part I didn't reveal to you, because it's been more clear to me in the months that have passed, that wasn't what kept me away. It wasn't my fear of mourning. I was mourning in my own house already. It's not like there was more mourning to be done. It was the shame. I was going to have to explain Michael to you, and I didn't want to do it. It was the embarrassment. You might just say, well, he's a friend. Well, he wasn't a friend. Is he a family member? Well, he really wasn't a family member. Well, what is he? Well, I didn't want to really say that. The idea is I thought it might make you uncomfortable. It might make you feel awkward. And then I finally had to confront that all of that was a phony. I mean, those feelings may definitely be true, but the reality, what was motivating me was I was ashamed. Ashamed of our relationship, and ashamed to simply say it out loud. And that shame had imprisoned me in the same way those women were filled with the shame of being a follower of Jesus Christ. So here on Easter Sunday, I stand proudly before you to say that I am Gary, and I've loved a man named Michael for 36 years, and I've mourned his death for 27 years. And there isn't an hour of any waking day that I don't think of him, that I don't miss him, and that I won't continue to miss him. He's the most important person in my life. And that being able to finally simply say that out loud allows me to do something that has to be done with shame. It has to be put in the tomb. You see, that's what Jesus did. When he died on the cross and suffered and died for our sins, he took on all the guilt, all the shame. He left nothing behind. It all went with him. Even the guilt you're carrying and the shame you're carrying, the guilt and shame I still continue to carry because we're human. All of that went into the tomb on Good Friday, every last bit of it. We know that sense of shame, don't we? Particularly when it deals with deaths, because for many of us, death makes us confront a terrible reality. There are things that we wish we had said, and there are things we wish we had not said. There are things that we wish we had done, and there are things we wish we had not done. Almost every one of us has unfinished business with people who've been buried there, and we have some level of guilt or shame that goes along with all of that. That's what complicates our grieving and mourning process, and all of that complication is so enmeshed into our Easter story. Jesus, you say, took this shame and took this guilt and put it in the tomb with him. So now let me complete the cycle. The women arrive at the tomb, the stone is rolled away, and they looked in, and the tomb is empty. The shame is not there. It's gone. Think about this. When Jesus was raised from the dead, no one saw it happen. So when the disciples come up to look, and when the women look in the tomb, all they see are burial cloths rolled up on the ground, laid on the floor in some place. That's all that's left in there. It was a young girl at Ascension many years ago that asked me in a religion class, where did Jesus get dressed on Easter Sunday? Good question. You know, they didn't bury him with a suitcase of clothing. All the white garments that were on there were laying on the floor. What, on heaven's sake, was Jesus wearing? Is it possible that he was raised from the dead naked? You see, he had been crucified naked. It's only our artistic and sensibility that now places loincloths on our crucifixes. That was never the point of crucifixion, which was meant to be a total public shaming. And for Jesus to arise from the dead, now completely purified and cleansed of his wounds and glorified, showing himself to his apostles, he says, look at my wounds. See that it's me. Look at the nail marks in my hands. Look at everything. See that I'm here. You're seeing a man who is also the Son of God, utterly and totally without any shame whatsoever. You see, that is the Easter story. The women went to the tomb and found it empty. And that's a frightening thing. What's frightening about finding an empty tomb? I'm trying to tell you that if our shame has disappeared and all of that. Well, let me just say this. The truth about shame, that I carried mine around for a very long time, is after a while it becomes comfortable. The shame is the thing that you know. As long as you keep it at bay, as long as you kind of hold it in, as long as you just, pay attention to it, keep it on its leash. In most cases, we can keep it carefully covered up or in a box. Every once in a while it sneaks out, as you all know. But that seems to be the best way to deal with it. For heaven's sakes, don't disturb it. See, the Easter tomb story challenges us now to leave the shame behind, and we have to ask ourselves, what next? That's what I asked myself when I left the cemetery 27 years ago. Now what? I knew I was going into the seminary and becoming a priest, but my vision of it was that I was going to have a nice, quiet life after that, and that I would never have friends again because it was just too difficult to go through all of that again. Well, most of you know my life it's nice, but it's not quiet, and I'm blessed with many, many, many friends, and I love my ministry more than my words can even say this morning, but those were not known to me as I drove away so sadly from that cemetery 27 years ago, and so it is true for every one of us as we begin our Easter journey. I guess it would be nice if it was tidy so that I could tell you Jesus is risen and you would jump up and say, that now solves every one of my problems. I'm so happy. I wish someone had told me that. Most of us know that we're supposed to be joyful on Easter, but many of us can't be joyful. We're still grieving. We're still feeling shame. We still have challenges. We're at the back end of a pandemic that doesn't seem to have come to an end and has turned our world upside down. We would like things to be the way they were, but just like when I drove away and left Michael and Angola Cemetery, the world never was going to be the same again, and it won't be the same for us on this Easter Sunday as well. That's why it's a frightening thing to encounter that empty tomb, because we're supposed to do something with it. You see, the women that were there was now going to have to start the mission of the church. See, the church was birthed at the empty tomb, and now you can probably see Jesus left no instructions, no operating manual. There's some cloths on the ground. That's it. There's nothing else. This whole ritual we're doing on Easter, that became developed over a couple of centuries, the ritual that we have now, but the apostles had to, from scratch, come together and how they were going to acknowledge what they remembered about Jesus and put into some type of way so that the worship could take place. You see, all of that evolved with no instruction whatsoever. That's what the women found so frightening. What was going to happen with their life? And if they're going to have to announce this to the world, what on heaven's sakes would they announce? And who would ever believe them that someone had been risen from the dead? Oddly enough, I found the answer to my question in the Shawshank Redemption, so I'll return there. You know, after Andy escaped from the prison, Red remained behind, his friend, and he was paroled somewhat later. We don't know how much later. But before Andy had broken out of the prison, he had told Red, if you ever get out of here, I've buried something for you in a field in Buxton, New Hampshire. I want you to have it. So when Red is paroled from the prison, his own sense of bewilderment and fear, always known as the prison his entire life, he didn't think he could make it on the outside world. You remember that from the film. But he remembered a promise that he made to Andy that he would at least go unearth that box that he buried. And so he hitches a ride up to Buxton, New Hampshire, and goes to the spot where he's been directed and digs around until he pulls a little box out. And the box has in it a bag with some sand in it, an envelope with some money in it, and more importantly, a letter. Andy had written a letter to Red. Here is the letter. Dear Red, if you're reading this, you've gotten out of here. And if you've come this far, maybe you're willing to come a little further. You remember the name of the town, don't you? I could use a good man to help me get my project on wheels. I'll keep an eye out for you, the chessboard ready. Remember, Red, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. I will be hoping that this letter finds you and finds you well. Your friend, Andy. Turns out the tomb wasn't completely empty. What was left in the tomb was hope. Hope's not a thing. It's not a tangible object. The church teaches it as a theological virtue. But hope turns out to be what the women would have to uncover and the men who followed them to uncover to build into the theology and the structure and the ritual of our church and to become the new message of the church, that now there is hope. You see, that's what Easter really tells us. It tells us that the grave is not the final destination. It tells us that death is not the unfortunate end of our life, that instead it opens the door to something so glorious that we don't have words to describe it. And because we are believers, you see, this is not something we can see with our own eyes or hear with our own ears or touch with our own hands or smell with our own nose. We can't use any of our senses to access it in any particular kind of way. This is something we simply have to believe. That's the only way this hope can have any purchase with us. We have to become persons of faith, willing to believe that something greater awaits us. You see, it's Jesus who will pull us across the finish line. We're not going to see it ahead of time. And that's what the promise of Easter is all about, that there's a basis for hope. In a world that's still filled upside down with all of the business of the pandemic and with our own personal dramas that are happening in our lives, this world, 2,000 years later, still desperately needs the hope that was found in the tomb on that first Easter Sunday 2,000 years ago. It's the centerpiece of our faith. It is the basis for our Christian joy. Or to say it more eloquently, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and a good thing never dies.